Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Practical Behavior Strategies for the Classroom, presented by Rita, Ellis, and Cheyney Cushing.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us. This is Cheyney Cushing, School Liaison.
And I'm Rita Ellis. I'm the Instructional Specialist with KUMDC. So enabling is another way of saying learned helplessness, and it's a vicious cycle that reinforces itself. Because as our students consistently perceive that there's nothing they can do to control their outcome, they make less and less of an attempt to even try. So as their efforts dissipate, they fail. So enabling is disabling.
And the enabling educator sees the student as incapable of solving his or her own problems. And so the enabled student will then believe they're either good at it or they're not. The enabling educator might make decisions for a student so that when a student is frustrated, they just give up. An enabling educator might take over for a student and do for a student what he or she can do for themselves. And in turn, an enabled student doesn't like to be challenged. When they fail, they feel like they're no good. They feel like if their classmates succeed, they feel threatened. And they also feel their abilities are what determines everything. So this is frustration and how a student sees themselves when an atmosphere of a fixed mindset is fostered in the classroom. And this again can lead to that learned helplessness.
So whereas with an empowering educator, the student will see themselves as having resources to solve his or her own problems, because the educator lets the student make their own decisions in a lot of occasions. They encourage the student's own abilities and allow the students to do for themselves, no matter how imperfectly it's done. The empowered student will in turn believe that they can do anything they want to do, or at least attempt it. And when they're frustrated, they will continue to persevere. They will like to challenge themselves, and when they fail, they'll learn from their mistakes. If their classmates are successful, then they're inspired. They're not threatened by that success. Their efforts and attitude will determine everything about their outcomes. So this is success and is how a student sees themselves when a growth mindset is fostered in the classroom. So teachers and paras, if you want to cultivate curious lifelong learners, then you should stop and think before you answer a student's question. Ask yourself, is this a question that they could figure out for themselves? If the answer is yes, then let them struggle a little bit. And I know how hard it is to watch them struggle, but that struggle is what helps them to learn. The reward of answering their own questions is much more gratifying and helps to combat the culture of learned helplessness. And this is what leads to grit.
So how can we learn to break learned helplessness and create that growth mindset? So the first thing we're going to talk about is no man is an island. So often we see students away from their peers and isolated, and oftentimes they might be with a paraprofessional or another teacher if you have a co-teaching situation, but kids learn so much from their peers. When we remove them from that authentic learning environment, it can be very detrimental. This is not to say a student should be in a general education class with general ed peers all of the time. We do know that's not always appropriate, but it is to say in any academic setting, that could be self-contained, an inclusion class, co-taught class, we should allow for group activities where students can interact with their same age peers and not just adult teachers or paraprofessionals or aides. So take a moment to step away from the student. Your proximity to them can be an inhibitor. And as we see, of course, in the cartoon here, Mrs. Jones and Mrs. Cooper are still trying to figure out why Fred doesn't feel like part of the class. And we see that Fred is sitting in the back on his own island with a paraprofessional or with another teacher there, and while the rest of his students are engaged up front. So we don't want to be like Mrs. Jones and Mrs. Cooper, and we want to make sure that Fred is part of the class.
Another one to try is choice and voice. Do you realize that the normal adult makes over 30,000 choices in a day, and over 250 of those choices are about the foods that they're going to eat? How many choices do we really give our students in an instructional day? We should double that, because every kiddo should have some choices in their day. Give them more choices so they can lose that feeling of helplessness. If you have a challenging student and not sure where to start with choice and voice, some places you could start is, do you want to use a pencil or a pen to do this activity? or even what color pen or pencil or crayon. Do you want to do your reading or your math first? What book should we read today? So instead of letting the cafeteria workers make the entire lunch plate up for a student, require that students make some choices, even yes or no, because choices do matter. Student choice is, as our little image says, student choice is more than simply picking a task. It's about owning the entire learning process.
And next, we want to remember to spread the love. So that means, in this case, help more than one student at a time. When you start to find yourself attached to the hip of a student, try spreading the love. Of course, we know some students need that level of support because of the complexity of their disability, but even with that in mind, you are meant to be the bridge for that student and not a barricade. So when you figure out a way to get yourself working with more students, your students will be automatically more engaged with their peers. Oftentimes, they'll also be learning some more standards-based materials than they might be in another situation. So remember to spread the love.
And we want to aim for the sky. So shoot for the moon, because even if you miss, as it says, you'll land among the stars. So we want to presume competence, because having high expectations does matter for our students. If we presume confidence and we're right, then we win and the students win. If we presume confidence and we're wrong, we have lost nothing. We just delivered a quality education, whether it was understood fully or not. The expectations we have for our students and the expectations they have for themselves matter. And one thing is, IQ testing is not perfect, and certain disabilities can limit that accurate IQ measurement. So that's not always a good judge of what your students can and can't learn. And that presuming incompetence can cause irreparable harm if you're wrong, which leads right into
constantly reassess your levels of support. So in other words, don't always do what you've always done. We know that'll always get you the same results that you've always gotten. So try pulling back your level of support just to see what happens. What happens if you're not there to do what you've always done? Will the student flounder or will they flourish? The only way to know is to try. Everyone who works with students with significant disabilities needs to understand that help does not always mean doing it for someone. This visual helps. And I know as former educators, it can be super hard. You know, we want to be there to help. We want to be there to do things for our students and to help them out when we think it's best. But it's important to remember that we need to start down here on the bottom of our graphic at that independent level of support. So try seeing if the student is able to do it by themselves. And then you can move your way up that prompt hierarchy to provide more levels of support when it's needed, but always give them that chance to do something independently. And what they may be able to do one day with, you know, maybe modeling, they might be able to do that independently the next day. So make sure you're constantly reassessing that.
And for a lot of our students, they've learned to outweight us adults in the classroom. They know that if they wait long enough, one of us might do it for them. So we have to break that expectation of our students. We have to retrain them to understand that we can and we will outweight them. In most general education classrooms, the teachers, when asked to offer a wait time after asking a question, usually only wait approximately a second. They are trained then to extend that to 3 to 5 seconds to allow the students time to process and to think. But in the special education classroom, the wait time should be extended at least 10 seconds. If you're in a life skills classroom, you might have to wait 30 to 60 seconds to allow enough processing and think time, but possibly even more for students who need it. And it should feel somewhat like this. We're going to watch a short little video here, and then we'll come back.
Hey Siri, set timer for 14 minutes.
Okay, 14 minutes and counting.
Waiting for cookies. Hey Siri, play me waiting playlist. Thank you.
If I could say time in a bottle, the first thing that I'd like to do
Me so hungry for cookie.
is to say it every day till eternity passes away, just to spend them with you.
Hey Siri, check the timer.
Could make days
Here's the timer.
last forever.
Oh.
Okay, well, I think we're having a buffering problem on our end. But you get the message. You have to wait and you have to feel awkward about it. You have to feel like Cookie Monster. In fact, channel your best Cookie Monster by getting your waiting music in your head and offering a lot of wait time to your students. At first, it does feel weird. You'll be uncomfortable. Your students may be uncomfortable. You'll feel frustrated, just like Cookie. But after your students get used to your expectation, they will rise to the occasion and maybe even surprise you and start to do a lot more on their own.
And next, we want to remember to model, model, model. As the adults in the room, you have to model what you're supposed to do when you don't know what to do, or even how you, as an adult, handle situations that are difficult. So sometimes that means voicing out loud your thought process or your frustrations. A student with significant disabilities can't always deduce what's going on in your brain as an adult. They need to hear it and see it modeled for them so they know how they should attack situations where they're either unsure of what to do or simply don't know what's appropriate. It's okay for a student to see an adult have to ask for help, see an adult have to navigate a failure, or see an adult have to think through options out loud before they decide what to do. Students with disabilities don't often get a chance to hear and see what that looks like. We have to model that self-talk so a student can develop decision-making skills. You become less helpless when you have some ideas of what you should do. So a lot of the things that we maybe take for granted that come very easily to us as adults, we need to be modeling for our students. And a good visual here to remember is the I do, we do, you do graphic. Most of you in education have probably heard of that, but just remember, always start out with that modeling and help out your students so that they know what they should be doing in same situations. So next, we are going to talk about behavior prevention and teaching strategies. And the following strategies were adapted from Dr. Danielle Liso, who works with the University of Florida Center for Autism and Related Disabilities, or CARD Center.
But before we talk about those strategies, we want you to watch this video. And this is a video of Carly Fleshman, and she is with her father and her sister. And while we're watching what her dad and sister perceive her to be thinking and wanting, we actually will have some insight into what Carly is actually thinking and wanting.
I can't wait for a coffee. Oh, hello, barista.
What do you girls want?
Skim soy latte? Taryn, soy can't be skim.
Hot chocolate, orange juice.
No, Dad, I want a coffee. Hot chocolate? Great.
So I was thinking of going to Sarah's later. Could you give me a ride?
Yeah, sure. Are you cool with taking your sister?
Yeah.
Wait, what? I have my own plan.
Carly.
Okay, I'll see you tonight, okay?
How can I help?
And as you can see from that video, there's a lot going on. And her dad and her sister are thinking that they know what she wants, when in reality, she's wanting something different. But not only that, the environmental noises and things that are going on are very overwhelming. Carly is a young lady on the spectrum, and she did not have a viable means of communicating until she was 10. And she was working with her therapist, and she went to the laptop and typed into the laptop, "Help, teeth hurt." And at that point, they really did not think Carly was capable of learning much. But as it turns out, through working with her and giving her a device to communicate with, and many therapies, they've realized that she has an IQ of 120 and was later enrolled into a mainstream school. She's co-written her own book. She has a lot of enterprises that she's involved with. So just keep that in mind as we go through these strategies.
So the behavioral functions, to keep these in mind, when a child has a behavior or has a meltdown or does something that they're not supposed to do, they're either trying to get something or they're trying to get away from something. So using that example of Carly at the coffee shop with her dad and sister, she was trying to get something. We know that for a fact. She wanted coffee. She also was trying to get away from a lot of things. There was definitely too much stimulation going on in there, the coffee noises, maybe the smells, the sounds, and the lights, everything all like that. Especially for our students with autism, that can be overwhelming. So remember, when a student has a behavior, they're either trying to get attention, comfort, stimulation, food or drink, tangible items, or they're trying to get away from attention, discomfort, stimulation, transition, or demands.
So 3 important questions you can ask yourself to try and think about the behavior functions is what makes that behavior start and stop. So really take a look when a behavior occurs at what was happening just prior to it in the classroom, other students, what was going on with that student, the noises, anything like that, and try to take note of that. And then when the behavior stopped, take note of what caused the behavior to stop as well. Is the student trying to get something or get away from something, as Cheyney said? And is that behavior representing a skill or a motivational deficit?
So we're going to take a look at some prevention strategies first. First, we have transition warnings and timers. So transition warnings are also known as safety signals. And the transition warnings and timers are often used together. The warning provides a student time to prepare for a change in activities. So this could be something simple like saying, class, in 5 minutes, we're going to clean up and get ready to do our math. So a lot of times these can be helpful when transitioning from a preferred activity to a less preferred activity, but it can also be used in the other way, from less preferred to a preferred activity. And it needs to be followed through. So when the time is up, it's up. So you might give the class that 5-minute warning verbally, but then you might also want to give them a timer. So this allows students to know when an activity has a clear end and they're able to see it and visualize it. Like I said, it can and should probably be used together with a transition warning and should be associated with some type of countdown. So the students are able, like I said, to visualize what that looks like. 5 minutes, what does that look like on a countdown or on a timer? And here we have this website, onlinestopwatch.com/classroom timers. They have some awesome, very cool classroom timers. They have got students racing around a track. They've got spaceships going up. And a lot of times the students could maybe select which timer they want to use. That gives them some more additional buy-in. And that again would be considered a visual timer that you could utilize in the classroom or even at home if you'd like.
Yeah, that's a good point, Cheyney. A lot of these strategies can be used not only in the classroom, but they can be used at home just as easily. So the next one we want to talk about is a first then board. So that's a visual that tells the student, first you do this, then you do that. It can be used to explain a reward. So first you're going to clean up and then you can watch the video or listen to music or anything else that's motivating to that student. It can be used to explain a neutral transition. So first we go potty, then we wash our hands. It can also be used to explain a less preferred transition. So first we're going to go to the playground and then we have reading time. And with the first then boards, you can see it depicted by the graphic below. The one on the left is the actual first then board, and the one on the image on the right is some examples. These particular examples are for early elementary, but these can be used all the way up through high school and even beyond for your students and children that need them. But you can make them as elaborate or as simple as you want. I mean, your first could be a first, and then your then, they could, you could have multiple steps to your first as the student progresses.
So schedules and mini schedules. These could be either picture-based, or they could have words, or a combination of both. You could even allow your students to help you create these. Again, that adds in that buy-in. And they help provide natural cues for independence and spontaneous initiation. So if a student is able to see, after PE, we're going to go to math, and then we're going to do reading, they might be able to independently, go to their schedule and start getting out their math assignments or getting the things that they need to go to PE or any of those things that would be appropriate for that next activity. And they help students to understand expectations for his or her behavior. I know in my classroom, we had a visual schedule, but we also went over it every morning. And after each class, we turned over, the previous course that we had finished. And it just really helped students to understand, once we finish this maybe less preferred activity, you'll be able to do that preferred activity. And they know what was coming next. Help with the consistent delivery of prompts and reinforcers. So it reminds you as adults in the classroom to give those prompts and to reinforce after each activity or after each period of the day. And when kids know what to do and what's coming next, they can do it by themselves. So again, that buy-in is really important. And the more that they know, the more they'll be able to do.
And one of the things that sets students off the most is when they're told no. So instead of telling them no, tell them it's unavailable. But when it's unavailable, you need to let them know when it will be available. So if they can't have it right now, they can have it after reading. Also, you can give them options. Would you like to do this or that instead? And as you can see by the picture here, this is one of the teachers that we work closely with in her para. And one of the students wanted her attention, and she was wearing the universal no at that time, so she was unavailable, and she had let the student know when she would be available. So then there wasn't that threat of being told no, so the student was able to refocus and go back to what they were doing without having a tantrum. So use that universal no.
Choices. I know we've touched on this a little bit already. They are so important. It can provide opportunities for communication exchange. So maybe your students who are primarily nonverbal with verbal language, you can have little mini conversations when it comes to choices. When given a choice, the students will be more likely to stay engaged. Again, I know I've said it over and over again, but that buy-in is so important, and the choices can really provide a great opportunity to provide that for them. They can be offered using photos, visuals, or actual objects. So based on whatever your student is most comfortable with or is most appropriate for the student. It could even be words if that's what's best for your student. Choices are powerful because they give control back to the student. And like Rita said earlier, it could be little choices. It could be the color of pencil that we're using. It could be, are we going to do our math worksheet first or our reading worksheet first? Little choices like that really can give a lot of power back to the students and control over their day. And that's super important. It really empowers them. And remember to offer choices between and within activities. So not necessarily just the core of your activities or your academic assignments, but between the activities as well. Asking them maybe what they want to do first, or who they would like to help do certain things. You know, there's just so many opportunities to give students choices throughout the day, and it can be so important and help decrease your problem behaviors drastically if you do give them those choices.
And when we're working with students, we want to make sure that every activity ends on a positive note, even if it means providing a little extra help at the end of the activity, or allowing the activity to end before it's actually finished, so that they don't have a chance to get too frustrated and melt down. So if you see some of the triggers that, or some of the signs that your student is getting ready to have a meltdown, walk over, stand next to them, pick up their paper, look at it, tell them what a wonderful job they've done, and tell them, say, you know what, we're gonna stop right there because you've worked so hard, and give them that positivity over the work that they've already done. And this will increase the likelihood that the students will want to come back for more and want to do more and want to build out their stamina in doing activities before they get frustrated.
Active participation. So encourage your students to participate in much of the activity as possible. A lot of times we're requiring our students to just participate in that core academic piece or the life skills piece, anything that's the core part. But that's usually the hardest part for the student, because those are the skills we're teaching them to do. So if you can encourage activity or encourage active participation throughout the day, the setup, the preparation for the activity, and then also the ending and the transitions, they'll have more opportunities for success throughout the activity. And then because of that, they'll have more opportunities to access reinforcement. And then that builds on behavioral momentum, and the student gets on a roll and wants to, kind of like Rita said, keep going, continue, have more opportunities for success and more opportunities to access reinforcement.
So here we have a list of 10 ways to improve the quality of a learning environment. In other words, your classroom. So add new materials and rotate them periodically, because we get so bored doing the same things day in and day out, and so do our students. And that leads to frustration, which in turn can lead to behaviors. Teach children new ways to use materials, so maybe they don't have to use it the same old way. Increase choices. I know we talk about this, and Cheyney and I both have talked about this, but that is so important with the students, to give them those choices and to empower them to make those choices. Even if it's something simple as, do you want to work on this or that? Or do you want to use this or that? Embed your instruction within motivating activities. If you know your student loves cars, then find a way to incorporate cars into that activity. Make sure you listen to the child's voice and their preferences, because that will build that respect with them when they know that you care and that you're listening and that you hear them and that you hear their preferences. Even something as simple as the rate of reinforcement and descriptive praises. In the beginning, you may need to do it every 15 seconds, whereas later on, you may be able to stretch that out to 30-minute periods, to an hour, to a full activity, to whatever. But in the beginning, you're going to definitely have to raise the bar on that and really give lots of reinforcement and descriptive praise. Teach your children to give peers compliments as well. You know, that builds that community within your classroom. And as we said before, always end your instructional sessions on a success. So make sure that student finishes with success. So keep your eye on them. And if you see them starting to show signs of getting ready to melt down, then go over and offer them a way out, and be flexible, willing to shorten those sessions before that challenging behavior occurs. And also, if you're going to have something that you know is going to be really difficult with them, then alternate it with an easy task or active tasks with passive tasks, because many of our students can't sit for long periods of time. So if they're going to have to sit and listen for a little while, then alternate that with an activity that lets them get up and move around.
So next we're going to go over some teaching strategies. Of course, first we had prevention. Now we're going to teach some of the skills that our students need additional help on. So clear behavioral expectations is first. Be sure to state your directions clearly. Use one direction at a time, and remember to phrase things as a statement, not a question. And I know as former educators, we did this all the time, but we know best practice is to form it as a statement. It's not, do you want to do your math? It's time for math. So if you can make sure and have these expectations for your students and go over them every day, every week, every month, you know, not just at the beginning of the school year. I know that's the time that we tend to do it a lot, and that's fine. It should be probably more so in the beginning of the school year. But remember, throughout the school year, your students need to have those expectations and reminders for them throughout the school year.
So to help avoid prompt dependency with students, teach them to use their environmental cues to prompt their action. So when the bell rings and it's lunchtime, then they know that they need to put their things away and line up at the door to go to lunch or things like that. Instead of giving them direct orders, so to speak, of what to do, ask them questions. Oh, you know, like, what do you need to do? Where do you need to go? What's next? What materials do you need? And allow them to help learn how to use that environmental cue in order to prompt their action.
Some functional communication messages. You want to model and reinforce the use of important phrases throughout the day, especially the following. Top 6 communication messages that are used, I believe, in early education or in special ed classrooms throughout the US. I need help, I need a break, I am all done, more please, no thanks, and bathroom please. So as an adult, model those things. You know, when you need a break, when it's time for you as a paraprofessional to take your break, say, I need a break, or help to model on the student's communication device how that's utilized and how that's set appropriately. So your students see you doing this and they're more likely to pick up on what you're doing and what they should be doing in the correct way.
So verbal rehearsal. We definitely want to review the rules or expectations of the classroom and the school ahead of time with the students. One of the things that I used to do in my own classroom was at the beginning of the year, we would have our first morning meeting and we would come up with a list of rules and expectations for our classroom. There were also rules and expectations that our PBIS team would put together for expectations in the hallways, expectations in the bathroom, different activities like that that our students would engage in. What I would do is I would then take these rules and expectations and I would put them in the form of a game that the students would play periodically throughout the year. We didn't just do it at the beginning of the year because students do need those reminders and that rehearsal. So we would go through and I would say, oh, I would describe a behavior and they would have to determine who had that rule that covered that behavior. And so we made it more into a game so that those rules and expectations kind of stuck in their mind a little more. And they actually enjoyed playing it too.
So role playing and scripting, this kind of piggybacks off of what Rita was saying. Practice expected behaviors and consider those examples and non-examples. So it's not just about how we do things correctly, but maybe give examples of what what something we don't want to do looks like, because your students may not always realize what that looks like. And then teach basic scripts. Some of the things, again, that come easily to us as adults may not come as easily to our kids and young adults. So initiating conversations, staying on topic, and asking and answering questions. All those things can be modeled, and you can role play and script some of those things for your students so that they're seeing it all the time and they're then more likely to pick up and initiate on their own.
So prompting, we always want to have a plan in place for fading our prompts. And before we begin, we want to communicate with the other staff in our classroom because we all want to be on the same page with what our fading prompts means. The number obviously is obvious. I mean, it's just the number of times that you prompt, but the intrusiveness is the level of work on the adult's part. And I can't tell you how many times that I've seen in my own classroom where I have helped my student to finish work that they should have been able to finish on their own, something as simple as coloring a picture for a card for their mother. And I had a mother once open my eyes when she said that my coloring was very beautiful, but she really would have preferred that her student color it. And that was in my first year of teaching. So that was very eye-opening to me. So that was when I learned to step back and step away and let the student do it themselves. So we want to be aware of our prompt dependent kids because they come to rely on that prompting, and they learn that this is the way this skill is done. They think that in order to write their name, an adult has to take their hand and do it hand over hand or hand under hand. And so the prompt dependent kid doesn't mean that they're lazy or non-compliant. It means that we didn't follow our prompt fading plan, or we didn't have a plan to fade the prompts. And we also have to be aware of prompt dependent adults, because as adults, we become to anticipate our role too. And we just step in and we just do it without thinking of ways to fade those prompts and allow those students to gain more independence. So just make sure you have a plan and that you communicate that plan among your staff.
So some additional strategies we want you to remember for teaching. This comes from the Crisis Prevention Institute, CPI. These are behavior management strategies that they thought were most important, 10 of them. Some of them we've already gone over, but some additional ones, active listening. So make sure you're listening to your students. Set clear limits. We spoke about sidestep power struggles. I think this one's really important because our students, a lot of times as adults and as human beings, you know, a lot of times we get defensive and it becomes a power struggle instead of something very tiny that could have maybe been sidestepped. Make sure you're meeting students' physical and emotional needs. So there's a great acronym, HALT or HALT. It stands for hunger, anger, lonely, and tired. So remember those things, not only for your students, but for yourself as well. Are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely? Or are you tired? If you are one of those things, there's a good chance that your emotions are probably not going to be in check. And then piggybacking off of that, the daily physical activity. That's an important part of living and of being a human. And we need to make sure that our students and us as adults have enough daily physical activity, because that can lead to some emotional needs as well. Mindfulness and breathing exercises. This can be really important. A thing that you can practice with your whole class. You know, you can sit, everybody can sit in their desks and you can practice closing your eyes and just thinking about your breathing. There's some great stuff online about breathing exercises that can be really helpful. And going back to daily physical activity, one thing I used to do in my class was Zumba. There's some awesome teaching Zumba videos on YouTube that are specifically for students. And if you maybe just take 5 to 10 minutes each day to do that with your kids, it gives them a great brain break. And it's a lot of fun. It's often to popular songs, so the students love it and it gets everybody up and moving. And the adults would be up and moving doing it as well. That's important too. Catch them being good. So your students, some, of course, we know are harder to catch being good than others, but we want to make sure when we see little things that they do, maybe they're helping out a classmate or a friend, or maybe they pick something up off the ground that someone else dropped, make sure you really give them praise for that. And make sure you're really telling them what a great job and how proud you are of them for doing so. Because that can build up their emotion, it can build up their self-confidence and really help them to continue to want to learn and to continue to want to please you as a teacher. We said most of the others of these pro-social skills, you want to model those, offer choices. And then number 10 is really important as well. We didn't touch on that much, but alter the volume and cadence of your voice. Something I know that a lot of us probably did was videotape ourselves as students to become teachers. And that's something you can still do. You don't necessarily have to use a video, but even if you just were to record yourself talking, you can listen to the volume and how you're speaking to your students. That can make a huge difference. Even if what you're saying is perfectly fine, sometimes just the cadence of your voice can come off wrong to students. So sometimes that helps if you can record yourself.
So next we're going to talk a little bit about reinforce. So reinforcement strategies. So reinforcement exists if and only if, after it has been delivered or removed, the behavior that it intended to reinforce increases. So if the behavior that it intended to increase doesn't increase, then it isn't reinforcing to the student. It should also be immediate and contingent. So it should immediately follow the student complying or doing whatever behavior it is that you're wanting, and it should be contingent on them doing that behavior. So with positive reinforcement, behavior increases after something positive is delivered contingent on behavior. And that contingent presentation results in increase in future behavior. Negative reinforcement is when behavior increases after something aversive is removed, and the contingent removal results in increase in future behavior. So we want to make sure that our reinforcement is reinforcing and that it is immediate and contingent. So it's not what you think will reinforce the behavior. It's not what the student likes even. It's what he or she is willing to change his or her behavior to get in that moment in time. And that can change today, from yesterday to the day after. It can change moment by moment. So it's what the student is willing to change their behavior to get at that moment.
So some examples of reinforcers. Reinforcers are broken into two different categories: primary reinforcers and secondary reinforcers. And primary reinforcers occur naturally and are things that don't have to be learned by any of us. So examples of primary reinforcers include things that satisfy basic survival needs: edibles, sensory reinforcers, warmth or cold when it's hot, any foods, touch from other humans. Those are all primary reinforcers. And then money can be used as a secondary reinforcer because it can be used to acquire those primary reinforcers, such as food or clothing. This type of reinforcement can be used to encourage students to engage in adaptive behaviors. So while they have no inherent reinforcement value by themselves, the secondary reinforcers do not, they can be used to purchase primary reinforcers, such as other privileges. So once this association has been made, the tokens or money or things like that, by themselves, they become reinforcing. So they become learned reinforcers. So what's the reason that we want to use secondary reinforcers? Why don't we just go directly to primary reinforcers, because those are automatic? Well, the reason is that secondary reinforcement is less susceptible to satiation. So it provides the opportunity to deliver reinforcement at any time. Primary reinforcers are only reinforcing if the person is in a state of deprivation. So if I've just eaten a huge lunch and I am so stuffed that the thought of food is just, normally goldfish really reinforces me and really will get me to change my behavior. But I've just eaten a huge lunch, I'm not likely going to change my behavior because you offer me goldfish as a reinforcement. So we need to think about those things when we find reinforcers that work for our students. Think about what state they're in. Have they just eaten? Then food is probably not the greatest reinforcer at that time.
Which is a perfect segue into reinforcer sampling or preference assessment. And these should be conducted regularly to determine what the student prefers and the relative preference between the items. So what's most reinforcing to the student?
So we have three methods: ask the student or caregivers. Asking the student, we have to be sure that the student can indicate a preference. So if a student's not able to indicate a preference, it may be appropriate just to go directly to their caregivers or their teachers or their parents. You can use open-ended questions or a choice format. Do you like this or that? You can rank the options. And then there are a lot of published surveys online that you can find for free. CARD has some great resources on that as well. Asking parents and caregivers, like I said, is more appropriate if the student cannot indicate their own preference. But even if your students can, you should still be probably asking parents as well for their input on those things. Some of the more common assessments are the reinforcer assessment for individuals with severe disabilities and the reinforcement inventory for young children.
And the next method is just to observe the student with free access to items. And there's a couple of different ways we can do this. One is a free operant observation. So they have completely free access to the items and you just kind of watch and see what they gravitate towards. Another is the contrived free operant observations, and that's where you offer single and multiple item presentations within a drill and practice context. The next is a naturalistic free operant observations, and that's where you offer single and multiple item presentations, but they're within a play context with you.
And then our last method is a trial-based test and sampling procedures. And you can do this with paired stimuli. So you can create a list of 5 to 8 items and pair each item with every other one, and then ask, which do you like better or which do you want? It could be done hypothetically. So verbally you could say, do you like oranges or apples? Or you could use the real items if that's better for a student. And then you want to count the number of times an item was selected and then calculate a percentage selected score for each item. And then items that are selected at least 80% of opportunities are likely to be reinforcers. So just remember that. You want to at least hit that 80% mark for an item to be considered likely to be reinforced for a student. You can do this by single item presentation, kind of like Rita said, the forced choice, multiple stimulus presentation. So one item could be presented at a time, or they could be provided in pairs, or all items could be presented simultaneously. And once the item that's selected by the student as preferred, it's removed, and then you would rank the order of those reinforcers. So as you can see, there's a ton of different ways to do reinforcer sampling with students.
And some points that we want you to remember is that something is reinforcing when a person is willing to change their behavior to get it. And that is different than just a simple reward.
Remember to be creative and enthusiastic with your reinforcement delivery.
Remember that you can increase the power of the reinforcer by offering it as a choice. That choice sometimes is more powerful than the reward itself.
And what is reinforcing for one behavior for a student may not reinforce another behavior.
And what is reinforcing for one person at one time may not be reinforcing for that person at another time. So how do you know when to address an inappropriate behavior? Some things you need to consider. Is this behavior annoying versus disruptive? If it's disruptive to others, then you may want to look at it and address it. If it's just annoying, then you may want to just ignore it and try and extinguish that way. If it compromises the student's ability to attend or learn or to socialize, if it compromises the student's ability to be independent, then those are some of the things that you may want to look at as reasons to address the inappropriate behavior. But be careful, because you really have to think and really examine, and in order to know for sure whether it's something you should address or something you should just ignore.
And then redirection. It's not always all about stopping the behavior, but you can redirect in a lot of instances. So recognize that the student is about to engage or is engaging in an inappropriate behavior. And the biggest thing you can do is not draw attention to it. So if you can look away but still redirect, that's probably the best you can do. Redirect to an appropriate activity, like it says, or even better, redirect to a choice, to 2 appropriate activities. So again, you're giving that choice back to the student, you're giving them that power to make a choice, and you can help to de-escalate before it gets to a situation where you cannot.
And the 80-20 rule, or the Pareto principle, it states that roughly 80% of the effects come from 20% of the causes. So we want to be sure and focus on prevention. Here's some strategies that will help you to stay focused on prevention. Make sure you tell your students what you expect, because they're not mind readers. They don't know what your expectations are. And while we may think they understand what our expectations are, we need to verbalize that and really make sure they understand. We want to establish a positive learning environment, provide meaningful learning experiences, avoid threats. Don't threaten something. Don't say you're going to lose your recess if you don't do this, or things like that. Try to avoid that. Demonstrate fairness. If you know a student is having a really bad day and you sit down and you talk with them and they happen to share with you something really horrible that's happened at home, maybe you overlook that behavior that just occurred and you just hug them and love them and give them a safe place to be. You want to build and exhibit their self-confidence and recognize their positive attributes. Every single student, I guarantee you can find one thing positive to say about that. You want to use positive modeling and manipulate your physical environment so that it is focused more on prevention. If you know that certain sounds or certain visuals set a student off, then try to minimize those in the room. Limit your downtime. Downtime is probably one of the things most likely to cause behavior, because when students are bored, then they start looking for ways to get attention. Also using proximity control, just walk over near the student. A lot of times that can get them refocused on what they need to be doing. And structure, routines, predictability, those are some of the most important things you can use in any classroom, not just an ESE classroom. But like we were saying earlier, when students know what to expect and know what's coming next, then they are more independent, they feel more comfortable, and they function well within that box. And make sure to maintain instructional control.